Good morning, nuts and bolts listeners, and welcome to this Friday's podcast, which is about the art of communication and feedback. You'll see the emphasis is really on two words: communication and feedback. So let's start off with the definition of communication so that we make sure we're all on the same page, because very often this word is thrown around a lot, but what is communication? And I went and looked up a very clear, easy way of defining it. And it said communication is exchanging information, ideas, and messages between two or more people through speaking, writing, or body language. So communication always requires two or more people. I mean, self-conversations to oneself is not regarded as communication. And we either do it through speaking, verbal, writing, so that could be formal writing, emails, WhatsApps, SMSs, or body language. So those are literally the three ways that we communicate. The art of communication is to ensure that what you are saying actually is received by the recipient, the other person, the way you intended it to be. It's not difficult to actually share information, but has the other person understood it the way you intended it to be? And in this process, like these airwaves, if that is not clear, then miscommunication happens. So it's always important to check that what are you trying to say has been heard and understood by the other person, which means that we really need to communicate with intent. Slow down when we communicate so that we really become very conscious of what am I trying to impart onto the other person. What is the language I'm using? What's the tone of voice I'm using? What is the expression I'm using, and how can I confirm that it's happening? And I'm sure we've all experienced it where we've just shared information with somebody, written, verbal, voice messages, and the response was either nothing or the action that came back was different, or the person took offense to the message. And we then sit back and go, what happened here? How did this go wrong? And we'll notice that when that happens, it's often because we are in a bit of a hurry. We aren't that conscious or aware. We just want to just get it done, and we skip over steps in our thinking, or we think we have shared information with a person, which opens the whole process of miscommunication, misunderstanding, conflict, challenges in interpersonal relationships, and so on and so forth. So communication is very important, both in your personal life and in your professional life. So learning really good, efficient communication skills is very important as a leader, as a family member, and so on and so forth. And I know a lot of people tell me, I don't have time to really slow down my communication. I don't have time to elaborate this or perhaps explain some of the steps forward. It's just, I'm going to share this. But not taking the time costs you time, because you have to go back, re-explain, recorrect, and all of that. So it's often just, take that minute beforehand to just think about it, be clear what you want to communicate, be clear on what your expectations are, and then do it. It saves you actually more time. What I also want to highlight for you is to observe your recipient's preferred communication style. So here we are talking about if the person is a visual communicator, an auditory communicator, a kinesthetic communicator, or a thinking communicator, and also understanding what you are. So let's look at each of them just for a moment briefly. A visual communicator sees communication in pictures and images. So they will say, I see, I picture, I visualize. So they see that. An auditory person is very auditory. So they'll hear things. So they are exceptionally strong on listening. And they'll go, I hear you say. Is that what you said? So they will go back to the listening. So they, by nature, are very good listeners and hear you. And then the third one is the kinesthetic listener. The kinesthetic listener is the feeling person. They will go on, this feels right to me. They'll listen and trust their gut if this feels like it makes sense to them. And the final communication preference is the thinker, and they will go, this makes sense to me. So they look for the logic, the facts, and it's you'll get the clues of which is their preferred communication style through the language that they use. So you'll hear a thinker say that this makes sense. Or you'll hear a kinesthetic person saying, this feels right for me. And if it feels right for you, then let's do it. So they actually use those words and give you those telltale signs of which they are. So what's important is for you to know what your preferred communication style is. And if you look at the four, you'll have a range on it, for example, and you'll have a primary one and then some that are a bit less. So to give you an idea, my primary communication method is thinking. It always has to make logical sense for me. Then my second one is kinesthetic. It has to feel right for me. It's a gut feel I have, an intuitive feeling. Then it's auditory, which is listening. And the auditory and the kinesthetic for me are like so alike. It's like they have an equal score. And the one that is least, my preferred style, is visual. However, when I communicate with somebody else, I need to know what their preferred communication style is and adapt my communication style to theirs so that I know that they understand my communication message and it lands. So that makes it easier for two people to speak the same language instead of having two people speaking two foreign languages where the chances of you understanding each other is quite slim. So really just take a moment and think, are you more a thinker, a feeler, hearing, or a visual person? And then observe that in the next few days, how you communicate, because you'll communicate like that in your written format, your writing format, your voice messages, your body language, and so on and so forth. So just create your own awareness. You'll have a good chuckle of really what it is. So that's really enough about communication. Let's look at the second part of today's topic, which is feedback. And feedback for most leaders, direct reports, is a big challenge. And the reason is that very often the feedback we need to provide to team members, colleagues, peers is a stretch between really explaining what they've done well and where there are areas of development, or it could even be, unfortunately, feedback which is a lot about performance or non-productivity or attitude. So quite challenging feedback to give. And what's important about feedback is, one, the preparation. And again, for you to sit back and think, how would I like this feedback to land? Like, what's my intention with the feedback? And very often your intention is to give honest feedback, but not harm or hurtful feedback, and hopeful feedback to help the person to grow. So you've got like a mixture in that, and it's really coming in with that heart of saying, I really want to do these things for you. There's no room for ego then, because your feedback is intended to grow the person. And if that's your feedback, if that's your mindset, your body language will come across like that. Your verbal language will come across like that. So you come in that way. If you do not prepare for feedback and you're trying to wing it, it very often turns into harmful feedback, which then results in a lot more conflict and destruction of interpersonal relationships. So trust gets destroyed, and the feedback just ricochets. It goes where you don't want it to be. So really take time to make sure you've prepared for your feedback, what you want to say, how you want to say it, how much of it you want to say. Because remember, on the other end, there is a human being whose words, your words, are going to impact on them significantly, and they're going to remember what you have said. So we need to be very sensitive to balancing that. So if you're looking at feedback, think of it as you're giving a person a gift. And also for the recipient to see feedback as a gift, not as criticism, not as being picked on, not as always being, a moaning session or anything, but really from both perspectives, see it as a gift. So if you are going to give the recipient a gift, take time and intent and effort to think, what is the gift I'm going to give to them? Because it's like if you would give a gift to a friend, you spend a bit of thought beforehand and think, okay, what is the person like? What would give them joy? How can I do this? So apply yourself and prepare for it. And for the recipient to see the feedback as a gift, from the sense of it as a gift of learning and developing and growing. So really seeing it from that angle. Not all gifts that we receive in our lives we like, we can use, or are wrapped nicely. So some gifts just don't come with the nice wrapping, but it's what's in the gift, the content, that is important for us. So really look at a gift, look at feedback as a gift. 3 tips I want to leave managers or leaders with when providing feedback is to, 1, really bring in a combination of strengths and stretches. So areas that the person did exceptionally well, highlight them, provide examples when they did it. So really being crystal clear. So don't just say that you're doing this well, so you are a good planner, or you always deliver projects on time, really give them substantial examples of when they did it. So when you observed it, so that they can relate back to it and go, oh yes, I remember that. So hence you need to prepare and really emphasize what they did well. And then equally emphasize where there is growth for them and that you believe in them. So when you are supplying growth, again, bring in examples where it could be that I observed when you delivered this project, there were perhaps we had to redo it, or there were gaps in your thinking, or it was maybe a bit rushed and we missed some details, whatever. I mean, just really be very specific so that the person can again relate to it. Many leaders use the sandwich feedback model, which is where you give positive feedback, which is the top bun, and then it's the meat, which is the negative feedback, and then it's the bottom bun, which is positive feedback. The challenge with that is that people do not listen. They know the strategy when you're giving it to them. So they already know it's going to be positive, blah, blah, blah. They're not going to listen to it. They're going to hear the meat part, and that's all they're going to get stuck in. And they're not going to hear the second bun part, which is the positive. So they will only walk out with what didn't work out, the meat. So there's a lot of disagreement or contentiousness around the hamburger or the sandwich approach. And using it that we'll do strengths and stretches, positives and negatives, helps a bit more. And you can choose how you want to do it, which way around. You can start off with the negatives, end with the positives, vice versa. Best is to sometimes ask the person how they would prefer to receive the feedback. And also make sure when you do give the growth feedback that you actually develop it into growth feedback. So where you've said, I need you to improve on X, Y, Z, what's the strategy we can apply? How can I help you? Like give them support on getting there. Don't let them figure it out themselves. So really help them to feel guided, supported, and find a solution jointly, and then agree on when we're going to check in on this again. So we're going to give you 4 months to do this, and in 4 months we'll check in again, or in 4 months we'd like this to be done, but I'll check in with you on a bi-monthly time period. So all of those need to be discussed. So that's the first tip, which I know is a bit long. The second one is to really give your team, individually, collectively, regular feedback. So not only when it's performance review time, which is 6 months or once a year, but really give your team feedback very quickly. Sometimes we're talking weekly, definitely bi-weekly, because your team wants to know a lot faster. How are we doing? How are we meeting targets? And if not, let's counter correct this. Let's do something and not let it last. Because if you would give me feedback on something I did 3-4 months ago, the chances are that I can relate to it or remember it are very slim. So giving feedback quite often, and it doesn't have to be super detailed. It can be short little 20-minute sessions on feedback and seeing how you can support them and guide them. Remember, this generation that is now in the workforce has these. They used to continuous, regular, all on-the-go feedback. They want it. They want to see how they're doing, how they're progressing. So it's not overwhelmed for them at all. Thirdly, when it's about feedback as a leader, really watch your ego, because it really comes from the point of always the heart and the intention. Like, you want to grow your employees. That is your primary responsibility as a leader, and that's where you really want to be focusing on. So all your feedback, all your communication always has one common denominator. How can I grow my team? How can I let them be a better version of themselves? How can I help them to flourish and really be optimal in what they're doing? So those are really the three main tips. And then closing, I want to leave you with an inspiring quote, which I really like, from Oprah Winfrey, which says, great communication starts with connections. You can only communicate greatly if you build solid relationships with your teams, which means you need to invest time with them, and that opens the communication. So on that note, I will leave you about the art of communication and feedback. Go and find out which of the 4 communication styles you are. Just play around with it a little bit this week. So have fun, look after yourself, and I'll see you next week. Have an amazing weekend. Take good care, and bye-bye.